honey is really a byproduct of what bees do. Bees' existence really is their use to nature is as pollinators. The honey is just something they get for their own food and to survive the winter, and it just happens to be something that we like as a delicacy.
The value of the pollinating is huge, and so we are doing our best to protect the pollinating service that they actually do.
Without that work, we wouldn't have all these nice flowers, but we will also not have all the fruits and the seeds for feeding us and for feeding animals in general.
Generally speaking, in Denmark now you wouldn't keep more than 15 colonies in any one place because there's simply not enough flowers to keep more than 15 colonies. So in general, anywhere where intensive farming has happened, and that's most of Europe now, and Denmark is one of the most farmed countries in the world in terms of, it's not generally great for bees.
Bees are very, very important. Also for horticultural crops like apples, pears, plums, cherries, bee pollination is quite important and can increase yields very considerably. So definitely farmers want bees to be out there, and also many farmers are beekeepers themselves.
Our diet would become much less varied. We would lose a terrible amount of nice things. Basically said that every third mouthful that we eat is from the action of bees. What we would still have would be all these boring things like potatoes. What we would be lacking would be the fruits, like the tomatoes, like apples, cherries, strawberries. We would not starve to death, for sure not, but we would definitely have to live on a much less varied diet.
There are several threats to bees in Denmark, primarily varroa mites, habitat change and pesticides. The EU has recently drawn particular focus to a group of industrial pesticides, which have been dubbed a significant factor in bee decline.
We have a group of pesticides called the neonicotinoids, and they're designed to kill insects, and the bees are very susceptible to that. They have some features that are in terms of bees problematic.
These are an insect nerve agent, so they affect the transmission of the signal between the nerve synapses which control the muscles of bees. Minute amounts of this chemical in an insect will cause their muscles to go into spasm, cause them to collapse, be unable to fly, unable to navigate, unable to communicate, and die a grotesque and painful death.
The EU banned the use of neonicotinoids in December 2013. The ban will be implemented this year across Europe, with Denmark included as a country with a phase-out period. This allows the continued use until the end of this year.
The neonicotinoids is the most widely used group of insecticides actually in the world. So it's obvious that to me that the farmers will use it and see a benefit from it. And of course, now that they are banned, I guess they are not so happy about it.
In certain crops, insect attacks can be totally devastating.
The farming industry relies heavily on pesticides to protect their crops. Without neonicotinoids, farmers have to use alternatives, largely a group called pyrethroids, which come with their own challenges.
All these pyrethroids, they have the same mechanism of action when it comes to the way they kill the insect. And therefore there's a strong risk that the insect can develop resistance to them. And we've seen already for several pests, like the pollen beetles in the orchid rape, we have we have many populations here in Denmark that are resistant to these pyrethroids. Farmers reacted in the way that they would say, then we fear we'll have to spray much more with the pyrethroids. And of course, when you do that, you increase the risk of the insects developing resistance very dramatically. So therefore, it would be nice if we had 3 or 4 or 5 alternatives, but we don't.
With very few alternatives available to replace neonicotinoids, farmers see themselves limited to using pyrethroids, which can have a detrimental impact on bees, depending on the time of day that they are being sprayed.
If I spray this field tonight, and there'll be bees out here tomorrow, the assumption is that it will not damage the bees tomorrow. These products that we can use in Denmark are not that harmful to bees, so bees can safely collect nectar and pollen here tomorrow if I have sprayed tonight. And that's very practical. I don't need to be in the field margin saying, "Oh no, bees, please don't get in."
With the use of pyrethroids, it is important to keep an open dialogue between farmers and beekeepers.
The one thing that you really don't like to see as a beekeeper is to see them spraying the crops during the day. Especially if you have bees right next to a farm, you should probably make yourself known to the farmer, and just, what you can either do, generally they'll spray after nightfall or very early in the morning when the bees are not out flying, but you don't want to be in the fields whilst they're spraying, because then those bees won't come home again, and that's a real shame.
We try to make it visible to the farmer which products are most benign to the bees, but sometimes he'll also have to choose one that might be less benign, because that's the only one that has efficacy against that particular insect that he wants to control. So it's always about compromises, unfortunately.
With 61% of the landscape in Denmark being used for agriculture, the natural environment in the countryside is disappearing, leaving bees heavily reliant on seasonal crops. Along with the impact of insecticides, bees are also suffering from the use of herbicides that eliminate weeds among these crops. This is creating what is known as a monoculture environment, with limited food sources for bees at certain times of the year.
Yeah, you have, if you look out beyond the trees there, you have about 1 kilometre straight of a cornfield, huge one, and there is absolutely nothing, not a single flower or anything within that area that my bees can get. Last year that was oilseed rape, so they had an absolute paradise for 4 weeks in May. I think since the advent of intensive farming and also pesticides, there used to be a lot more wildflowers that would grow up amongst the crops, and they're gone now. So you have it's a complete monoculture, you call it. So after your flowering period of 4 weeks or whatever, it might be 2 weeks sometimes, and that's kind of it then for the rest of the year.
Maybe 80% of the plants that flower, they flower here in springtime. And we need to have some of the plants more common that flower in the middle of summer. They are not actively planted into these fences, hedgerows, as I would like to see it. And this is it's not a small thing to do, it's quite a big change, but if we don't do this, the bees will continue to suffer in the middle of summer.
Yeah, I think beekeepers have to adapt to whatever's available. And I think we're in some ways lucky that oilseed rape is grown as a break crop in the wheat, the corn. They're not growing that crop for our beekeepers' benefit, and if they didn't grow it, then it'd be bad news.
In terms of wild bees, I think the best thing that people, farmers, garden owners can do is help in the habitat. But there's no regulation or the making flowering strip, for instance. But we encourage that from the EPA.
There's a lot of things that can contribute to those issues with the bee decline. And I hope we get a good understanding so we can tackle these problems in a good way in the future.
Surprisingly, it's an urban environment which proves to be the most welcoming place for bees. The Booby City Bee project, based in Copenhagen, is a social project which aims to sensitise people to the importance of bees in the ecosystem.
Well, honeybees in the city are healthier than bees in the countryside. They produce better honey than bees in the countryside. They produce maybe 40 to 50% more than bees in the countryside. And the habitat for them is much better than bees in the countryside. So cities are actually paradoxically ideal habitat for bees, not only because it's good for them, but also because they can teach us. Having bees in your window box, having honey from your own area, is a concrete lesson in environmental sustainable productivity.
You're welcome to come on in. I discovered that it was actually possible to have bees in your own local environment. You didn't have to be a farmer, you didn't have to be well educated in insect life, you just had to be enthusiastic.
Actually, it's just do it, because it's like, you know, getting a pet or something like that, because you get you get attached to them, and then you look at the bees every day and see how they're doing, and so not only the honey and the wax and the other things you can get out of them, but it's more than that.
So I got them for a number of reasons, but one of them was to complete the little would-be ecosystem that I see this whole thing as. I mean, we're all part of the ecosystem anyway, aren't we? We all think about water consumption. We all think about fuel consumption. We don't necessarily do that much about it, but what little bit that we can do, if everyone did it, would really make a change.
One of the reasons that we want to do this, because we think about the environment, and the nature is forced on all kinds of levels. So this is our small, way to say that we want to make a difference.
I think there is something really special with kids. I think they understand this approach immediately. They are fascinated by the bees, they can see the honey, they can see the connection with the plants. This is a relationship that they need to internalize and learn as they get older, as they grow up. I think, I really believe this is one of the most important things that our generation needs to learn.